This is Ray Stokes in the oral history section of the TCOM library on August the 25th, Thursday, 1983. Today we're pleased to have the first librarian of the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine in our office. Her name is Mrs. Joan Swaim. And we're delighted to have you with us today, Joan, and I'm going to refer to you as Joan from here on out throughout the interview. And we certainly are pleased that you have consented to share some of your memoirs of the days of 1970 to, I believe you left here about August 1977, if I'm correct.
It was June.
Was it June? Well, I knew it was in the summertime of 1977. So you were here more than 7 years, the early stages of the school. We're delighted for you, and I'd like to first just kick off the first question by asking you to kindly relate the circumstances that led to your joining the TCOM faculty in the fall of 1970 and thereby becoming the department head of the library.
All right. In 1970, I was employed at the TCU library, Texas Christian University library, as a file clerk. I had in 1968 received a Master of Arts degree in English from TCU with the idea that I wanted to teach, and I quickly found out that that was not the way I wanted to go. So I was more or less at loose ends working in the TCU library as a clerical. I had had a previous association with Dr. Hart at TCU, and Dr. Hart was, you'll have to help me with that.
Well, he was the first dean of TCOM.
He was the top administrator.
And top
at the
administrator,
time.
he certainly was for a number of years until we graduated the first class in
Right.
'74.
Okay. Dr. Hart had contacted Ruth Wasnick, who was the catalog librarian at TCU at that time.
Now, he had been the head of the chemistry department
Yes.
at TCU
Yes.
before he retired there.
Yes, and
Right.
I knew him both as a student and as a colleague of my father's, who my father was the chairman of the biology department at
Right.
TCU at that time. Dr. Hart had contacted Ruth Wasnick to ask her if she knew of anyone who might be interested in taking the librarian position at TCOM. And she had told him that she would search. And she came up with my name. I did not have a library degree at that time, but I did have a master's degree, and I contacted Dr. Hart, and Dr. Hart seemed interested, and that led to an interview and an application and a job offer, which I took.
Well, good, good.
And I appeared on October the 1st, 1970, I believe.
That's the day we
Is
opened
that right?
school.
Okay, that's
You
the
might
day
have
I
been
was
here 2 or 3 days earlier,
No,
I don't
I
know.
wasn't.
You didn't come in?
I came that day.
Thank you, Joan, for bringing us up to date on your beginning. Now I wonder if you could remember and kind of give us a description of the physical layout of the library at the very beginning and the chronology of the various locations of the library while you were here.
Ray, I'm very fuzzy on measurements and dates, but I can describe the physical layout,
All right.
especially the first one and the second one. When I arrived in October 1970, the library was on the 5th floor, temporarily on the 5th floor of Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital.
Right.
In fact, the entire school, as you know, was contained on the 5th floor of the Osteopathic Hospital and the house across the street with the garage apartment.
May I interject a statement that you may not know about? You know, there's a plaque now right by the elevators stating that this is where the college was founded.
Is that right? No, I have never seen on the 5th floor.
On the 5th floor,
Right.
which is now a patient floor.
Well,
It's called the
it was-
Maybe. It's called the Maybe Pavilion,
I
which is
see.
named after the Maybe
The-
Foundation
of
that
Oklahoma.
gave several million or something to renovate it.
Sure. Well, it was at that time a temporary addition, unfinished addition to the hospital,
Right.
in anticipation of patient care.
Right.
I remember that some temporary basic science offices were there. Libby Harris's office, Charles
Right.
Rudolph, Tom.
That was biochemistry, wasn't
I can't remember Tom's last name. Yes, physiology. He was the first
Yes, he came from Alabama.
Yes, he did. The only classroom outside of the anatomy lab, of course, was next door to the library. The library was contained in one room, and here I just fail on dimensions. You probably know about the size of the room.
Well, I was supposed to have been the contractor to
It was a long time ago.
me and the carpenter, put it together. And you remember the battleship that we had there? He designed, and covering up some of the plumbing.
Yes,
It looked
yes,
just like a battleship.
I do remember that.
And Dr. Lubel would razz us and heckle us about the way that looked every time he'd come into your library.
Yes, I do remember that. We worked around it.
But it was,
I would guess it was, what, 30 by 40?
I'd say,
something like that.
but no more than that. 30
No
by
more
40.
than that.
That's right.
It was contained in one room. There was shelving around 3 sides with windows on the other side. I was startled to find out that Dr. Hart had brought some old chemistry shelving from TCU,
Right.
metal shelving.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was sitting out, erected in the middle of the room. That's about all there was. There was one table. And on the shelves, there were 4,000, I later counted, 4,000 old medical texts. They had been put on the shelves by Jack Bannister. You remember Jack?
I remember him in microbiology.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
because he said later he wanted me to arrive in a library that had books on the shelves instead of on the in their boxes, and he had stayed there that night and put the books on the shelves.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yes,
I'd heard that.
because, well, it's vivid in my memory, because what I had to do was to take all the books off the shelves and put them in the right order,
In the
because
right
he had
order.
just taken them out of boxes and put them.
Right.
So, while he thought he was doing me a favor, it would have been better otherwise.
Right.
Do you want me to go on and say how many books?
Well, yes. In other words, you mentioned 4,000, and I've been telling people down through the years 6. Now, I'm wrong, I'm sure.
Well, the day that I got there, there were approximately 4,000. Only 30 of which were brand new medical texts.
Only how many?
30.
30.
30. Now that was easy to count.
Well, that's kind of leading into another question, of course, about how did you go about selecting the original books?
Your figure of 6,000 may have been correct a couple of weeks later.
Probably. We had a
Because
lot
I
of donors
remember,
there the first month.
Yes, we did.
Most of them were giving us the same book, but
I remember a pickup truck that pulled up on the street outside with its entire back end filled with somebody's garage donation of books.
Right.
Mostly journals that I had to go through.
Right.
So yeah, the figure mounted. It started decreasing after I started throwing away old medical texts.
When did we leave the hospital?
Okay, I'm not exactly sure about that. You probably know more than that. I think that we were on the 5th floor for 2 years.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. 2 years.
And then we moved down to the bowling, old Taverner Palladium is
Right.
what it was.
Right. The bowling alley that had
right,
been
on Camp
closed.
Bowie.
And we that was in the 2nd year, you see, starting the latter part of August of
Right.
'71. And for that year, you continued to have the library there on.
I think that's correct. I think we moved down in September of, I guess it would be 79 then.
72.
72, I'm
Right.
sorry.
Yes.
At the time of my
Right,
dating.
right.
Okay, 1972. And we occupied what was formerly occupied by the anatomy lab.
Right. When you moved down to the
To the bowling alley.
3516, I believe it was.
It was.
Camp
It
Bowie.
was. Yes, I
Right.
put that on the return address for several years. And that was where we were in one long room. Again, dimensions fail me. That
Well, it was about, I
anatomy
would say about
lab
40 feet
occupied.
wide and 100 feet long, or 80 feet long at least.
Much longer than
Right,
it was wide.
right.
Yes. I think we stayed in that location for about a year, and then we expanded into the next section, same location, but the next section, which just doubled our room.
Right.
And then a year or maybe 2 years later, we expanded still into another room. So the library, when I left in 1977, was in the same basic place in the bowling alley, but
Just took on more
much
area.
larger room, yes, because we had expanded so rapidly.
Well, can you think of anything else pertaining to the physical makeup of your library in those pioneering years?
There was, yes, I do. It was all in one room, as I said. There was no office. There was one table. Eventually there were 2 tables. There was, the walls didn't go clear up to the ceiling, so that you could hear everything that was coming out of the offices, and I'm sure everybody could hear everything that was coming out or into the library.
The word quiet didn't mean very much, did it?
Didn't mean a thing. In addition to which, I was the only employee in the library for that first year, and I did all the typing, everything. And I could not type when there was somebody in there studying, so I had to schedule my time around the students in order to get the work done, because I was right out there in the middle. It's very interesting.
With reference to your books again, what means did you employ to increase the volumes? We had somewhere in the neighborhood 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 in the very beginning,
Right.
but what means did you employ to increase your volumes?
Well, of course there was a budget, and a very limited budget in the early years.
Right.
Relied almost entirely on requests and recommendations from basic science faculty. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, basic science was the only curriculum at that time for the first 2 years until they got to the third clinical year. Right. I dealt mostly with major scientific books in Dallas.
In Dallas?
Yes, and the majors' boys who ran the business at the time, I think they still do, were most helpful in helping me select. I knew nothing about medical libraries, frankly.
Right.
Dr. Hart hired me knowing that I did have somewhat of a scientific background, I guess because I was flexible.
Flexible.
And we needed all of our flexibility the first couple of years, as you know.
We really did. Well, what percentage of the total count of the books that you had in the beginning years would you say were donated books?
Oh, the major portion.
Major portion.
Major portion, because the budget was so small. Now, TOMA, I believe it was TOMA at the time. I don't know whether it still is.
Well, yes, it's Texas Occupied Medical Association. Now, it might have been something else at the time.
I think that the name changed.
The Physicians and Surgeons Association or something.
I think it
But,
was.
yeah, but it's now TOMA.
They, as I remember, and I don't know what the donation figure was, but they gave sizable donations as they could.
Right. In fact, Dr. Phil Russell was partly responsible for that donation, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
One of the
and of course,
pioneering.
Dr. Luba was a guiding force, and the man who died, Everett.
Well, he didn't die. Dr. Byers died.
Dr. Byers.
Dr. Danny Byers has died. Dr. Everett's still living.
But they were the three.
Yes, Dr. Lubel, Everett, and Byers.
Yes,
right.
and I think they helped in getting donations for the library. It started out so small and with a great need, and we slowly built it. Now, as far as journals go, we subscribed immediately to an exchange system through the National Library of Medicine. And Southwestern Medical Library, which is the University of Texas Health Science Center, Dallas now,
right,
was also very helpful. We could not have built the library here without their help.
Well, that's interesting, and some of our critics ought to know that more.
Don Hendricks was the director of the library at that time, and he could not have been more helpful.
Well, that's very interesting, Joan. It really is. You're mentioning volumes, journals a moment ago. I think it was the day before yesterday. We for any excuse that we have or can find around here, we have a birthday. or a party and cake cutting and so forth back in the back part of the library, and where all the work goes on, you know.
Yes, I know.
Right. And a couple of days ago, we celebrated the 40,000th volume, not volume, journal.
Really?
40,000 bound journals. Yeah,
Wonderful.
40,000. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Of course, we've got about 60,000 volumes, I think, of books and so forth now. But I understand that what we were celebrating today was the 40,000th bound journal.
Well, I would love to have celebrated with you because I started that whole process.
You certainly did.
We used Motters bookbinders.
Who?
Motters.
Motters.
In Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma.
And of course now you have to put it out on state bid, but
Yeah, right.
then I could choose who I wanted.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. In that very vein, do you recall any memorable experience during this first year or two that unusual development during a staff or faculty meeting that's outstanding? That's you
Ray,
treasure?
I think every day nearly was a memorable experience.
Right.
But I guess the most memorable thing in those early years was Dr. Hart.
Dr. Hart.
He kept us going. I never saw him down. He always had some note of optimism. We didn't always believe him. We
Right.
didn't believe there was going to be a tomorrow sometime.
Right.
But he always said, we're open and running, and isn't it great to be a part of this institution? And that was inspiring.
Those are memorable words.
They
really are.
are. He was just a wonderful guiding light to all
Well,
of us.
I've been trying to put together a little bit of the history of the school, and of course he leads. There are three reasons why I feel like that, and this is your interview, not mine. I don't want to get strung out, but there are three things that caused us to succeed, and I put him at the top of the list. No
It could
question
not
about it.
have gone on without him.
That's right.
Him and Dr. Lugal.
Well, yeah, certainly, by all means.
Well, the four of them. And you, Ray.
Well, thank you. You're very
You
kind.
too.
But I sometimes facetiously say that I have the distinction of being the first employee, and I hope that someday becomes distinctive.
It will be.
Well, let's move on here to another question, Joan. Somewhere around 1972, 1973, you went back to school to complete your M.L.S. degree. And will you kind of fill me in on some of the particulars that made this possible?
Yes, I will. When I started here in 1970, I started as part-time staff. And as the school grew, at the time that I was employed, there were no requirements for a medical Master of Library Science degree to be the head librarian. As the school grew, and especially after it became part of the university system, North Texas State University, it became more and more apparent that if I was to continue as the head of the library, I needed to have a Master of Library Science, which I was very willing to do, provided I had the time to do it. Dr. Marion Coy, at that time, was the president, I believe is what they call him. He had taken over as the top administrator.
Yes.
The DO. And he agreed to allow me to take the time from my work to commute to North Texas, and luckily had a library school,
Right.
to get my Master of Library Science degree. In the contract, I agreed, after I had gotten my degree, to stay for 5 years. I don't think I stayed quite that long, but that was a mutual agreement too.
Right.
But I did finish my library degree in 1975, I believe.
Yeah, I believe it was.
Mhm,
Yeah.
something like that. And I thank the school for allowing me to.
Yeah. Well, really,
to do
you
that.
you had already gotten your degree when we became state, hadn't you? See, the bill was signed in May 1975. It made us part of the North Texas system, but
Well-
we didn't. We don't. we consider September 1, 1975, since that's the beginning of the fiscal year, as September 1, 75 becoming, you know, part of the, going under the auspices of the Board of Regents of the
My
university.
degree was awarded in August of 1975.
Well, and that's just right at that time. You had, I was thinking you had just
got under the
gotten your
gun,
degree
didn't I?
just before, so you,
Right.
no question about that. Well, that's fine. Well, Joan, during your administration, the library advanced tremendously. There's no question about that. One particular innovation that I recall was the introduction of, I don't know anything about it, but fortunately you can explain it. It's called MEDLINE. Can you kindly describe something about MEDLINE, and then I think there's some other initials or something that meant something in that same vein, such as TALON, how do you pronounce that?
Talon.
Talon, and you had a sort of a consortia of various librarians in the Metroplex,
Right.
council and so forth, tied in, I'm sure in some respect with NTSU. Would you kindly give me a little idea about how we progressed in those accomplishments?
I'll try. Medical libraries under the leadership of the National Library of Medicine in Bethesda, Washington, Bethesda, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington,
Right.
has always, the medical libraries have always had a very close communication network. MEDLINE evolved from a program that was instituted by the National Library of Medicine, which was formerly called MEDLARS, which meant literally medical library, something or other reference services, automated reference services, because it was a machine database, an early machine database that was not online at the time, hence the word MEDLARS. You had to request a search for citations, medical citations, and that would be sent to you. It was be searched offline. When it became online, then the name changed to MEDLINE, and medical libraries started accessing through data communications lines, telephones, directly the online computer facilities from the National Library of Medicine, which they had something like, I guess 1,000, I'm guessing at that, 1,000 medical journals indexed online, and this was the service to get that kind of information out for the doctors. Again, the University of Texas Health Science Center at Dallas, which I constantly refer to as Southwestern Medical School because that's the way I grew up knowing it. It serves that medical school. They helped us. Again, Don Hendricks was instrumental in getting the okay for this library to have a MEDLINE service. We had to have the sanction of the National Library of Medicine in order to do that. We bought a terminal. It was an old Texas Instruments terminal. We were required, in order to be a MEDLINE center, and there was none in Fort Worth at the time, or even in Tarrant County, we were required to hire a person and send that person, a librarian, a qualified librarian, to the National Library of Medicine for 3 weeks of training. And hence I hired Sandy Echt, who was my first professional employee, and sent her to the National Library of Medicine, and she was employed at TCOM and did all of the database searching until, I guess, about a year after I left in 1977. She went on to the University of Texas Health Science Center and worked for about a year, and now she's at TCU as their reference librarian.
In that respect, Joan, of course, you were number one when you started, and you didn't have any assistants for quite some time.
Right.
You had an assistant who worked part-time, the late Elaine Roach.
I did.
And then how many did you have when you left?
When I left,
In other words, how large had the library grown
Right.
in personnel staff?
I had, when I left, 3 professionals besides myself. So there were 4 professional librarians on the staff with M.L.S's in medical library.
I see.
I had a secretary. I had 3 clerical full-time staff members and several student members. So we had really expanded. Of course, we'd expanded our volume count and our services, and we were off and running.
Incidentally, I apologize, I got you off of the subject of the services into personnel. Did you want to say anything further of what developed after or with Medline?
The Medline services stayed about the same until the time that Sandy and I both left. Added to that were other databases. Medline was the first nationwide, and then other services that had business data, psychological abstracts, chem abstracts, that kind of thing, were also computerized. And they were sold through other services. SDC and Lockheed, based in California, were the 2 that we ended up having when Sandy left.
I see.
Another thing, the terminal that we bought was not really bought for the Medline service. The terminal we had because the library was also in charge of, and therefore I was in charge of, what we call computer-assisted instruction. Do you remember that?
Right.
That was based at Ohio State University.
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And that was rather exciting to be in charge of, because it meant that I could help the students in the instruction of the use of that system. It was a question-answer type, again, a machine database computer.
Right.
So that was really what we had the terminal for, and we just used it for Medline when it came along.
Good. Anything further in that service realm that you can think about?
Oh no, I could talk about it for a long time, but I think that's not.
In that particular, here's something that you can talk about, I hope, a long time, because I know that even though you might want to be too modest to give us a little bit of your achievement and so forth, but the years that you were here at TCOM, what do you feel that you actually accomplished?
Well, I feel like we laid the foundations for what I consider to be a very fine library now. We were extremely active, and when I say we, I started, of course, and I was the only employee for a little while, and then Elaine was extremely active, most dedicated to acquiring journals at the lowest cost. Again, we were on a limited budget. And she is due a lot of credit there in just building up the journal collection. We had an active acquisition program. Of course, when we got on state funds, we weren't quite as limited financially, so that we were able to acquire a great deal more.
So you did get to spend some state money for a couple of years,
Oh,
didn't you?
indeed. It was restricting in that we had to put everything out on bid.
Right.
But let me say this about the state. I found it delightful to work with the state officials.
Good.
They were for us. They wanted us to have what we needed, and they worked with me very well.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, they
I
really
am.
did. It was cooperation all down the line.
Well, good.
During my reign.
Well, now that's quite an accomplishment right there. That really is. Anything else that you feel like that you and your staff are responsible for?
Well, I think beyond just establishing the school library and a service to the doctor community through our reference service, mainly Medline.
Well, that's something that really has grown now.
It really has. There was a demand for it at the time, and we met the demand with the Dallas people's help.
Good.
Also, with the help of Peter Smith Hospital in particular. Their hospital librarian, Jean Albrecht, was most helpful. She made a point of finding what we needed. If we didn't have it here, she'd get it to us. And that, actually, you asked about the Metroplex Council of Health Science Librarians, that was the embryo, so to speak, of that group. Jean and I began communicating, and pretty soon Alcon got in on the act, and Carswell Air Force Base Hospital, Harris Hospital, All Saints Hospital, St. Joseph's Hospital, and we decided that it would be helpful for our medical communities, DO and MD included, to have access to all of our materials. So we compiled and edited a union list of our journal holdings. And it grew outward across the turnpike to Dallas, and it became the Metroplex Council instead of just the Tarrant County Council. And there is, I think, still extant in various editions, in updated versions, the union list for the Dallas Health Science Libraries and the Tarrant County. So I'm very proud to have been in on the ground floor of that. It's a useful community service.
Thank you, Joan. I know the word failure is not in your vocabulary, and you've never failed, but in that particular respect, can you think of some of the, not necessarily failures, but some of the things that you weren't able to completely accomplish to your total satisfaction? Maybe some of the goals that you may have set that you weren't able to completely achieve.
I guess the main thing that I wasn't able to see through, I don't consider it a failure because it was my own initiative that I left. But I had designed the present library. I had helped design the present library. I had worked with the architects, and it became, well, I had an opportunity to leave before we actually got in up here. And I guess it was a year or two after this library was in place that I came to see it. And sure enough, it's just the way I had it.
Well, bless your heart.
Furniture and all.
We've been given
there have been some changes, but I was surprised. I could have told you where everything was.
I don't believe you had my little bailiwick in here.
No, I didn't. This was a hall here, and it had
offset.
Right. It had cases, exhibit cases planned for it. Yes, but I guess that was one thing that I had really wanted to see through. But was unable.
You and I both can last long enough to at least see MEDLINE 3, that we've been funded for, which will be the library building.
I hope so.
And if it's finished ahead of schedule, they've got it scheduled, I think, for September '86. But if they get through a year earlier, why, maybe I'll be around long enough to make one more move.
I hope so, right.
Into the new library building, which will be a 4-story building.
That's incredible. I knew that was in the works.
Yeah, about
a long time ago.
Right at 85,000 square feet, I think.
Oh, that's incredible.
Of that sort.
No,
well, Joan,
there weren't. I don't consider that we had very many failures, because in the beginning there wasn't any way to go but up, and we were continually building. So.
Well, I'm going to conclude our discussion here with a question that. You can field it any way you see fit, but of course when you left here it was a great loss for all of us who knew you and worked with you, and you're not only the students but the faculty and many of the members of the administration as well, and they were very sorry to see you leave. Can you kindly give any expression about why you did leave? Under what circumstances?
First of all, I had the opportunity to leave. I had another job at an institution that is the nearest and dearest to my heart.
Right.
I was born and raised on the TCU campus.
That's understandable.
I prefer the academic university community, which I didn't lack here, But I did have an opportunity to go to TCU. I had found it increasingly difficult to work with some of the administrators, and I don't wish to name them. There's no point in that. To work with some of the administrators that I was having to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like the opportunity was there, and I wanted to seize it. And so I did. And
well, in losing you, we wasn't long till we lost some of your assistants. So we had kind of a fruit basket turnover here for the first few months, I think, after you left. And of
I
course,
think
Mr.
that
Bobby Carter, you know,
Oh,
came in
yes.
'78, or
Oh, yes.
yeah, I believe it's '78,
Mhm.
and he's still here and doing a very fine job. He's an excellent.
I'm a little bit flattered that it took so long to replace me. But I had, as I said a little while ago, I had three professional librarians, Sandy Act, Ann Watley, and Mary Peters,
Mary Peters.
working for me. And I, of course, when I left them in charge, and Ann Watley was the interim director.
Mm-hmm.
We were a very, very close group. We felt like we ran a pretty good show. The students kept telling us we did, and some of the faculty members kept telling us we did. And we were very proud of ourselves and a very close-knit group. And I guess when I left, they felt like they should too. They just weren't as happy here without me, and I'm flattered about that too.
Right.
I'm sorry for the school because
Are they still in the library field?
Sandy is the only active librarian right now. All of them went to area libraries. Sandy and Ann both went to the University of Texas Health Science Center. Ann is the cataloger and Sandy is a database searcher.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Peters went to what is now, it's defunct now. It was the Texas Area 5 Health Science something or other in Dallas that had a library. Subsequently, they've all had children, and Ann and Mary have retired temporarily, and Sandy continues at TCU.
You still keep contact with them, I
Oh,
presume.
indeed.
Yeah.
In fact, we have what we call the Swaim Girls group.
Well, that's
And
nice.
I
That's
guess I'll
interesting.
have to record why that name came about. I'm not going to call names again, but when the last of the Swaim employees left, and that was Sandy Act, one administrator was heard to remark, "Thank goodness that's the last of the Swaim girls."
Is that
So
right?
we got a kick out of that because we
Well,
thought we were pretty good, and we have called ourselves.
That's
the
a
Swaim
PR story that I never had heard, Joan.
Well,
my goodness. Well,
at least
well,
we
you-
could laugh at it.
right. Well, Joan, we certainly are grateful for your coming and being interviewed, and we appreciate it very much. You've given me some information that I wasn't familiar with, and I'm grateful, and I know that those who will come after us will be grateful to learn more about the beginning of TCOM and the contribution that you made, and you did make a very, very important contribution, and I, for one, and I'm sure a number of others too, will always be indebted to for the contribution that you gave to the school.
Oh, thank you. I don't want to leave any kind of reflection that I wasn't happy here because it was a wonderful
Well, I know you were.
experience.
I know you were.
And I think of it very fondly, and I'm very proud to have had a part in it.
Thank you very much.